everybody, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution Scriptures. My name's Mark and we're in Deuteronomy. We're going to start Deuteronomy today. Last episode we were just doing the introductory notes and we talked a lot about fornication. Remember we delved into the spiritual adultery that Israel were partaking of, and it's always been their downfall, just as it has been ours all our life. And we talked about 21st century idolatry, which we know is all wrapped up in sun worship and the worship of the phallus. We looked at the penis festivals and brought it real close to home, didn't we? Gentlemen, men and ladies, how are you treating your members, your flesh, your genitalia? What are you doing with them? What aren't you doing with them? How are you treating yourself? Is Yahusha pleased with the way you behave in that area? That was what we dealt with last episode, and we're going to attempt to tackle the first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy today, because it's all really a history lesson. Moses is refreshing the minds of the people because it's a different generation, and he wants to put them in a bit of a refresher course of what really went down in the wilderness, and we're seeing it from his perspective after the fact. Often when you are dealing with a situation in the heat of the moment or explaining it to people at the time, it's very different to if you were to explain it years later, or with the wisdom and calmness of hindsight, of revelation since then. So it's very interesting. Let's look at the text. Let's not waste any time. Today is called Total Recall. We're recalling the whole journey. These first few chapters, before we get into the more of the official instructions and Moses' instructions of what he wants to tell Israel. Before we get into the actual official legislature and formal instructions that Yahusha gave at Sinai, and Moses giving them a bit of a recap and raising them up and reminding them about them, he first takes them on a bit of a recall of the 40 years wandering. So let's have a look at it. Total recall. It's been a journey, hasn't it? 4 out of the 5 books of these original books of Moses have been about Moses, really, haven't they? We were introduced to Moses at the beginning of Exodus, and then we've been reading about him, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and now into Deuteronomy as well. So he plays a big part in this story. And so we're coming to the end of his life. And let's just start reading, because there's a lot of things I want to talk about and we don't want it to go for too long. So total recall, Deuteronomy 1-3, Moses' grand opus. These are the final messages that Moses gave Israel while they were in the land of Moab, after conquering King Sihon of the Amorites and King Og of Bashan. And although it should have only taken 11 days to walk from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea by way of the Mount Seir road, Israel has been fussing around in rebellion for 40 odd years since they left Egypt. And now, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses is finally giving them these instructions before they enter the promised land of Canaan. So, if you knew, this was interesting, if you knew with certainty that your time on earth was ending in a matter of days or weeks, what would you like to say to those you love? What has life taught you that is so valuable that you desperately want your family and friends to know as they carry on after your death? What words would you like them to put in their heart and put into practice? You thought about that? Because this is the whole context. What's written right there. This is the context of Moses' grand opus here in Deuteronomy. He's literally pleading with the generation that will succeed him to carry on with the good work that Yahusha has begun, and not to make the same mistakes that he and their parents made. Not to make the same mistakes. If you can remember this, before we start Deuteronomy, this is the full context of the way Moses is talking. That's why in some parts it does seem like he's recapping. You might think, oh, didn't we just read that in Leviticus or Numbers? Yes, but that was 40 years prior, And he's got the wisdom and perspective of hindsight, and it's been 40 years. And he's about to die. He knows that. He's not allowed to go into the promised land. And this is what he's saying. He's pleading with them. Keep going. Don't make the same mistakes that your parents made. So, just a reminder, everything in green is like a commentary. Things that I've read, found, added myself, are things that I believe Yahusha wants us to know. And the text, of course, is in black. And most of the text in Deuteronomy is in blue because it's Moses talking. And of course, anything in red is Yahusha. So Moses, here we go, chapter 1. People of Israel, 40 years ago when we were back at Mount Sinai, Yahuwah our Elohim told us to hit the road and head into the land that belongs to the Amorites and their neighbors, the Canaanites, telling us that their land would be ours, just as he promised our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Finally, after being in Egypt for 400 years, it was time to go and receive our inheritance. This is the culmination of 400 years, plus the 100 years prior to that he had promised Abraham, that his inheritance, his descendants would be as numerous as the sand on the shore, sand on the shore, and the stars in the sky. All right? And that was a big deal to Abraham because he had no kids, remember? So now we come to the time where they're finally going to go and take over their land. But I told all your parents that their bitching, whinging, and complaining was doing my head in. Yes, that's right. Being their leader and carrying all the burdens of their strife was way too hard for me all by myself. Yahuwah had blessed Israel abundantly, and our nation wasn't small anymore, but as numerous as the stars in the sky. Interesting, he says it like that, isn't it? Knowing about the promise that was given to Abraham. Moses actually says in this here, it's a quote, that part's pretty much quoted, I left it in there. Yahuwah has blessed Israel abundantly, and the nation wasn't small anymore, but as numerous as the stars in the sky. 3 million odd people. So I told them all to choose experienced men from each tribe who were known for their wisdom and understanding and make them official leaders of their tribes. They thought this was a great idea. So I took these men who were already wise and respected leaders and made them your official leaders. And some even became military men in charge of tens, hundreds, and thousands, while others became judges. And for those who became judges, I told them to settle all their legal cases fairly, whether between two Israelites or between a Israelite and a foreigner living in their community. And it doesn't matter if one is helpless and the other is powerful. Don't be afraid of anyone. Don't show partiality. No matter who shows up in court, Yahuwah will help make a fair decision. And if any case is too hard, bring the people to me and I'll make the decision. And after I gave these instructions to the judges, I taught you all of Yahuwah's instructions. So he's giving them a recap. He's talking to the second generation here. Then he talks about exploring the land. And this is all fresh in our minds because we dealt with this only a few chapters ago, back in season 4, back in Numbers, when they actually experienced it, before they had to wander for 40 years. Yahuwah had instructed us to leave Mount Sinai and go to the hill country that belonged to the Amorites. So we started out into the huge wilderness. Some of you may remember how frightening it was, but soon we were at Kadesh Barnea. And I told everyone, we've reached the hill country now. It belongs to the Amorites, but Yahuwah our Elohim is giving it to us. Don't forget, he's the same Elohim our ancestors worshipped. And he's told us not to hesitate or be afraid, but to strive forward and take over this land of ourselves, for ourselves. Take over this land for ourselves. He says, don't forget, he's the same Elohim. We might be like, duh, but to them, that's a big deal because they've got hundreds of Elohims, remember? And he's saying, don't forget, this is the same Elohim that our ancestors worshipped. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, it's been 400 odd years. They've been assimilated into Egyptian slavery, worshipping, behaving, living, interbreeding, everything like the Egyptians. Remember your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember the prophecies. There were still a small few who would have held on to it. They would have been considered freaks probably, but they were holding on to the promises that Joseph had taught them all. So don't forget. And what did he just say? Don't be afraid, but strive forward and take over this land for ourselves. But all of your folks came to me and said, before we go into the land, let's send some men to explore it. And when they come back, they can tell us about the towns we'll find and what roads we should take to get there. I thought it seemed like a good idea at the time and chose 12 men, one from each tribe. And they explored the hill country as far as 𝔹𝕖𝕙𝕒𝕧𝕚𝕚, which means clusters of grapes, remember, and they brought some back. And they even brought back some of the fruit. And they said, Yahuwah, our Elohim, is giving us a good land. Just in case I forget, you might remember, because it's so fresh in our minds from a few episodes ago when we went through this actual historical event, you might feel like it's being retold slightly different. You know, even back up here when Moses is saying, what was it? Up here when he says, I told all your parents that all their bitching, whinging, and playing was doing my head in. He, remember it was Jethro who told him that. This didn't come from Moses. It came from Yahusha, but Jethro told him that, remember? This is too hard a load for you to carry all by yourself. Go on. But so it might sound like Moses is taking credit for this. And he's only human. Maybe he is. Or maybe it's been 40 odd years and we often embellish and just tell a story. We have a bit of a flow. Sometimes the details aren't exactly accurate, but as long as we're getting the essence and the heart out of it, this is an inspired book. Yahusha has given it to us, prepared it, guarded it, held it for us, protected it. And there's even actual Hebrew versions of it. So it's accurate. I don't think he's just blown it all out of proportion and he's, lifting himself up. He is an old man and he's telling it from his perspective. But just in case you feel like, oh, that's not what happened, Moses is embellishing, well, so what? It's his story, it's his account. That's why many have said this book isn't as important as the other four before it. I don't think so, because I think every book of scripture, even the first four that are quoting Yahusha, who quoted it? Moses had to, didn't he? Yeah, even though it's all red writing and it's all quoted, and Yahusha said this and Yahusha said that, it still had to come through a human hand. So I don't really hold to that. Some books were direct oracles from the Creator, and some books are just, testimony, and I don't buy into all that. I think it's all just as important. I think they all go hand in hand, all 66 books, plus lots of others as well that are accurate to the time. And you can judge for yourself when you read something, when you've got the portal open on your heart, when you've got the Ruach within you, when you are experiencing Yahusha more and more and more, you can read a passage and go, yeah, I believe that. That sounds like the Yahusha that I know. Or maybe it's like, oh, I didn't know that about Yahusha. Maybe I'll explore that more. And he takes you on a journey if he wants you to know it. This journey we're on is individual. It's collective as well. He does have an assembly. He does have a body, a bride, but it's also individual. So he tells you what he wants you to know. And so this, for me, is what he wants me to know. And he's also told me to push record and take everybody through it. So if it's relevant to you, if you're just starting out, if you're young, if you're old, if you want to sit back and have the scriptures read to you, great. If you're young and have never read it before, some of these parts, I can honestly say I've never read them before in my life because I've never wanted to. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it from the perspective and context that I've come out of with Yahusha in me now and the knowledge and wisdom I've been through. It's just wonderful to know this. So my point was simply, you might read some of this and go, oh, Moses is exaggerating a bit. Maybe he is, but it's still inspired, all right? Yahusha still wants us to know it. And I just wanted to let you know that it's reworded. And remember, we dealt with that last episode too. The emphasis is different. The emphasis is different because he's at the end of his life. He wants people to know, that the instructions are adapting to the land, adapting to this generation, to the, what this generation is into, and the culture has slightly shifted from being in the wilderness to about to become in the land. Just like the culture was different when Yahusha stood up and spoke it. Just as the culture is different today when we are speaking it. Not necessarily to crowds, but speaking it online, speaking it to our families. The culture is different again. So the behaviour adapts with the generations. Just like we talked about last episode. That's all I want to say about that. Moses is embellishing in parts, but it's just his memory. It's how he's inspired by Yahusha. So let's get on with it. Get on with it, mate. So anyway, they went up and explored the land, and they came back and said, Yahuwah Elohim is giving us a good land. Yippee-yi-yay, let's go into the land. It's great. But Yisrael didn't want to go and refused to obey Yahuwah. Instead, they stewed in their tents, grumbling. Yahuwah hates us. He just brought us out of Egypt so he could hand us over to the Amorites and get rid of us. We're freaking out in our boots because the men who explored the land told us the cities are so large with walls that reach to the sky, and the people who live there are taller and stronger than we are, and some of them are giant like Anakim. So now we have nowhere to go. Boo-hoo. Remember that. Two of the explorers, two of the witnesses, two of the explorers gave a good witness, which was here, and the other 10 gave this wicked, unbelieving report. So, and I told them to stop being so shocked and worried because Yahuwah our Elohim will lead the way for us, fighting on our side, just as he did when we saw him lay waste to the Egyptians. I reminded them that Yahuwah has taken care of us the whole time we've been in the wilderness, just like a parent would carry one of their own children. But they still wouldn't listen or trust Yahuwah, even though he'd always been with us in the wilderness. During the daytime, he was in the cloud, leading us in the right direction and showing us where to camp. And at night, he was there in the fire. Imagine that. I mean, we don't have that today. We have the Ruach within us. But imagine with your own eyes, physically being it, not just seeing it, but feeling the warmth, feeling the coolness in the day from the sun. Imagine having a physical, I mean, that doesn't compare to having him within us, flogging and rebuking us, but imagine being able to visibly see him. We don't have that, do we? We have a much greater witness within us. But in the beginning, it doesn't seem as magnificent as being able to physically see or touch, like the tabernacle, the ark, all that stuff that was going on. Imagine being like this. It shows that they were really hard-hearted, weren't they? We've been hard-hearted. But I don't feel like I'm this hard-hearted. Like, do you? I feel like this is why he divorced them. They were so hard-hearted. They really would not get over it, would not come into the mindset. And that in the end is why he destroyed them all and chose to carry it on with the next generation, with their children. So, which he's done time and time again ever since Yahusha was impaled and the Spirit was given. What's happened over the last 2,000 years? Generation after generation after generation has died in this earth, in the wilderness of this earth. And now he's talking to us. Probably the last generation on the earth, I believe. So, will we succeed or will we fall like they did? So, they had him physically manifested in the wilderness, in the fire and in the cloud. But Yisrael made Yahuwah furious. And he said, you people of this generation are evil, and I refuse to let you go into the good land that I promised your ancestors. Caleb is the only one of your generation that I will allow to go in. He obeyed me completely, so I'll give him and his children the land he explored. Obviously, we know Joshua was as well. He wasn't talking about Joshua at this point. Joshua was already going to be the leader at this point, so he's talking about Caleb. Caleb in the green. Caleb and Joshua were the only two explorers who brought a good report of the land, full of excitement and trust in Yahusha's promises. Do you like to have pity parties? Look at the negative in every situation? Even in just the reality of your life, your home, your children, your business, your job, your employees, your employer, everything in your life. Do you like to look at it through the rose-colored glasses of negativity? Do you like to look at things negatively, listening to the evil commentary in your ear? Or do you like to come at everything full of excitement and trust in Yahusha's promises? Because he has a promise for you, and I don't just mean an eternal promise. I'm talking about promises in a few months, in a few years. You know, he's told you something he wants you to do. If you're older, he's given you a plan that might work, and he's like, oh, that's something to give you excitement about. If you're middle-aged like I am, he's put a carrot in front of you, something to work towards. You might be trying to find a partner in your life. He's given you everything. You might have kids that you want to raise. Everything in your life is full of promises. That's something you have to believe in. You have to extend your belief, or you're just going to have a pity party. Sit in your tent and stew. Woe is me. You know? Yahuwah was even angry with me. This is Moses talking. Yahuwah was even angry with me because of you lot. Because of you lot. Saying, Moses, I'm not letting you go into the land either. Instead, I will let Joshua, your assistant, lead Yisrael in to conquer the land. So encourage him, please. Then Yahuwah spoke to your rebellious parents again. People of Yisrael, you hissed and spat, complaining that your innocent young children would be taken prisoner in the battle for the land. So guess what? Someday I'll let them go into the land, and with my help they'll conquer it and live there. But the rest of you can get well and truly stuffed. Go on, turn around and bugger off back into the wilderness where you came from. Go on, head back to the Red Sea now. Go on. You accused me of being so cruel as to let your innocent children die in conquering this land. Well, guess what? You're going to die and they're going to see it. So put that in your pipe. Then the people told me, we've behaved wickedly against Yahuwah our Elohim, reckon. But now we want to obey him. Oh, wow. Now we want to obey him. Oh, you've finally decided that you want to obey him, have you? Now we want to obey him. Let's go. Woohoo, let's go. Hurrah. Let's go into the hill country and fight, just as he told us to. And with that, they picked up their weapons, thinking it would be easy to take over the hill country. But Yahuwah said, Moses, go and warn them not to go into the hill country, for I won't be there to fight. I won't be there to help them fight. And their enemies will surely defeat them. Very important, very dangerous to go ahead in something where Yahuwah's not going, where Yahusha's not going to be there. Very dangerous. So I told them what Yahuwah had said, but they poo-pooed me and paid no attention, heading into the hill country anyway, thinking they were so great and powerful. But when the Amorites in the hill country attacked, they were powerless, and they all ran away like crying little bubbies, fleeing from a swarm of bees. And the Amorites chased them into Seir, as far as Hormah, killing them as they went. Then the remaining survivors came back to join Yisrael at Kadesh Barnea, with their tail between their legs, and they wept bitterly. But Yahuwah wouldn't listen to them or entertain their madness anymore. And after we'd been in Kadesh for a few months, we obeyed Yahuwah and headed back into the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. And that's what began their 40-odd years, about 38, 40-odd years of wandering. That's why. So that old expression, whenever the Creator closes a door, he opens a window, that old cliche, it's not true. There's many times in our life where we've missed the opportunity. We didn't believe, we treated people a certain way, we either lost property, lost possessions, lost a spouse, lost all sorts of things, maybe lost children, lost an opportunity, lost a blessing. You know, we've got consequences, punishments, everything like that. It's done. There's no window of opportunity. We failed, fell on our face, died in the bum. Yahusha said, no, you're not having it. You know, doesn't mean we've lost our deliverance, of course, unless you really go back into the world and stick it to Yahusha. But we can all see that Yahusha won't put up with disobedience forever. There comes a time when even the offer of deliverance, you know, is redacted. Obviously at our death, but even before that, if we choose to keep disobeying him in his face, he'll cut us off. So look what happened to them. It's the same Elohim, it's the same Creator, the same Yahusha here. He doesn't change. Very important to, obviously we don't know everything in the beginning when we've been immersed, but it's important to stick at it, stay on the training plan that we're on. Because if we deviate and go off it into the world, you may not find your way back. So this is an interesting point. The point that was not lost on this new generation, The point that was not lost on this new generation of Israelites is that they could have been born inside a land of milk and honey. They could have been born inside a land of milk and honey. Instead of inside a goatskin tent on a dusty trail next to a desert oasis. If only their parents had been obedient. We could say the same. We've all come out of depraved, hideous lifestyles of bondage and, misery. We've all come out of that. If only our parents knew this. Our parents often, most of them still don't know it. Maybe they died in their ignorance. But it's interesting, isn't it? We could all say the same thing. If only our parents had been obedient. If only our parents had known this. This is the second generation. The point was not lost on them that they could have been born inside the promised land. It was only supposed to take bloody 11 days from Mount Sinai. And they've been wandering around, farting around for 40 odd years because of their unbelief, their disobedience. If only their parents had been obedient. Yisrael should have already been settled in Canaan, enjoying the fruits of the land some 38 or so years earlier. The first generation believed in Yahusha, but they didn't trust him. They constantly irritated Moses and Yahusha by asking this rhetorical question, why did Elohim bring us out here in the wilderness just to die? How many times did they throw that in his face? Are you even here with us? Hello? Hello? Are you even here? Why did you bring us here? How disrespectful, how disgusting. They knew who Yahusha was. They believed he existed and that he was their Elohim, but they didn't trust in his ability to care for them or his determination to protect and guide them. That would be today the difference between being a religious believer or being in the bride. You can declare stuff with your mouth, but how's your behavior? How is your day-to-day behind the scenes with your spouse, with your family? How do you behave? Do you literally actively believe that he has the ability to care for you, to sustain you, to provide everything for you, to protect you and guide you? And so it took Yisrael 40 years to gain what they could have had much earlier. James, the brother of Yahusha, put this in another way. You believe that Elohim is one. Fantastic. Guess what? Well done. The demons also believe that and shudder in fear. But are you willing to recognize, you foolish people, that belief without action, which is obedient behavior, is useless? Or you believe, woohoo, whoop-de-doo-da-day. What are you going to do about it? As we all know, the Hebrew concept of belief is not just holding something in your mind, because we don't believe from our mind, do we? We believe from our heart. We think from our heart. Wasn't that a blowout, all those articles? We think from our heart. We believe from our heart. We behave and speak from our heart as well. It's got to be active. This was just an interesting little comparison here. The first generation rebelled, but now the second generation is being obedient. The first generation was sent southward. Now the second generation is ordered to march northward. Different areas of entry into the promised land. First generation was to enter the promised land from the southwest, but now the second generation is to enter the promised land from the southeast. First generation was told that they had stayed at Mount Horeb long enough. Now the second generation is told they have been skirting the promised land long enough. First generation knew they would die in the desert, but now the second generation knew they would live in Yahusha's set-apart land. So that was the first chapter, introducing us to the theme, just the general mood Moses is in, explaining all this. So remember, he doesn't want this second generation to fail. Please don't do what your parents did. Let's go on. So we spent many years wandering around outside the hill country of Seir, until Yahuwah said, Moses, Yisrael has wandered in these hills long enough. Turn and go north and tell the people to be very careful, because you will soon go through the land that belongs to your relatives, the descendants of Esau. And even though they're afraid of you, don't start a war with them, for I've already given them the hill country of Seir, and this land is not for you, not even enough to set foot on. So as you go through their land, you will have to buy food and water from them. It's not your land. Don't just consume the resources. We're talking about 3 odd million people here. So don't just take stuff. Anything obviously you've got to use water and stuff so you don't die. You just pay for it, account for it. Don't steal it. The nations that Yahusha is telling Yisrael to avoid is not about a fear within Yisrael or a worry that they might be defeated, but rather that the territories inhabited by these people were not to be part of the promised land, Because remember, if they went into a land and conquered it, it was theirs. So technically, it was theirs and it would be classified as the promised land. But this was not to be the promised land of Yisrael. This land had already been given to other people. So this was not to be part of the promised land, and the ancestry of the people involved, at least the people who currently occupied its territory, were related to Abraham in some way. Remember that, they were related to Abraham in some way. And Abraham was a very important person. He was pretty much the origin, the first Hebrew, even though Eba means Hebrew. No one talks about Eba, do they? Abraham, given the blood covenant with him through circumcision and everything, he was the man who we consider the father of our belief. He was the first Hebrew. So it's all about Abraham and his descendants, not just Isaac and Jacob, all his descendants, that what he's going to do with them. So they're all given certain spots of land. This whole quest, just here, this whole quest was not for the creation of a Hebrew empire. He didn't want to raise up another big metropolis, global power on the earth like Egypt was. He didn't want to do that. He wasn't raising up a big Hebrew empire. So it wasn't about that. It wasn't about conquering or converting the world either, or gaining as much wealth and treasure as possible. It was about the reclaiming of a specific piece of land that Yahusha declared was his, not Yisrael's. Some might think it's dangerous that I even put this in here because people are going to jump on this. See, it's all about the land. Woe to you if you try to take over that land, you Muslims and you jihads and you all this, you ratbags, the UN, or you watch out, or you, it's all about this land. It's Yahusha's land, not yours. It's for Yisrael. No, we dealt with that a few episodes ago. The heart property is here now. He's opening portals all over the world on people's hearts. Couldn't care less about the land. He's going to burn it all up. So if you're all in the natural and focusing on that, you nuts, mate. Don't get caught up in that. The only reason I'm listing it is to let you know that I'm going to touch on it later. It's about Abraham's descendants and how trustworthy and faithful, trustworthy Yahusha is to fulfill his promises. Indeed, Yahuwah has helped us and taken care of us during the past 40 years that we've been in this giant sandpit. We've had everything we needed, and he's blessed us and made us successful in everything we've done. He's provided for them. Their shoes haven't worn out. Yeah, sure, they would have walked past other nations and rubbed shoulders with certain other nomads, and they would have, traders and got things from other people. But in general, he supernaturally sustained them and provided for them. We know that, the quail, the manna, everything. So we traveled past the territory that belonged to the descendants of Esau, our relatives, and turned onto the desert road that leads to Moab. Then Yahuwah told me, don't try and start a war with Moab either. So he's just told them up here, not to start a war with in Seir, not to start a war with them, with the relatives of Esau. And now he's telling them not to start a war with Moab either. Leave them alone, because I gave that land to them. And you guys can't have any of it. You guys can't have any of it. Here it is right here. The first nation that Israel is to avoid contact with is Edom. That was the first paragraph we read. Edom is another name for Esau, Jacob's twin brother. So there was a very close kinship between Esau and Yisrael. And the instruction from Yahusha was to be careful with Seir. Whenever you see the word Seir, it's just another name for Edom, which is another word for Esau. So all these scripture is all in the same place, but over the generations it gets called different things. So, but it's all talking about the same bit of land. So don't be confused about that. It's always talking about the same areas, you know. They just call them different names. And this be careful does not mean to be wary or afraid either. Yahusha explains that the Edomites will be very alarmed and afraid of Yisrael. What is not said was already well understood in ancient times. That's why it's not said, it was already understood. That when a people you feared came too close, too near, you went out in battle to try and bruise them, to show that perhaps a treaty would be better. A treaty allowing the current king to remain in his post, rather than an attempt at conquering them outright. So Yisrael doesn't have to be afraid of anybody, because Yisrael is 3 odd million people and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So it's not about them being afraid that they can't take on any of these places. It's about Yahusha saying, this land does not belong to you. I've already promised it to other people. The idea is that Moses and the leaders of Yisrael need to do everything possible to make it clear to Edom that they have no intention of either taking their territory nor even taking food or water from them. Therefore, Yisrael skirted the land of Edom and continued northward towards Arabah, that was in the region of Moab. The Moabites too had a kinship with Yisrael, although not as close a one as they had with the descendants of Esau. The Moabites were the descendants of Lot. Okay, so the Edomites were the descendants of Esau. The Moabites are the descendants of Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. And for the sake of the patriarch Abraham, who loved Lot, Yahusha had set aside land for Lot's descendants. And he makes it crystal clear that this land is not for Yisrael either. Therefore, they are to avoid conflict with Moab. We can see from this, that's the whole point of me mentioning this to you, we can see from this that Yahusha was honouring the promise of land to all of Abraham's descendants and family, not just Israel. He is trustworthy and true and favours those who he considers his friend, those who love him and want to please him through their obedient behaviour. Now have a think about that. The blood covenant only carried through Isaac and Jacob and now the 12 tribes of Israel, his chosen bride, his chosen people on earth. All the other, as far as we know, all the other sons of Abraham, Ishmael and his relative, his nephew Lot, they weren't believers. They weren't honouring. For all we know, they did. They had lots of deities. They worshipped multiple. They're polytheistic. They did not honour Yahusha at all, but Yahusha honours them because of one man, Abraham. Look at Noah's sons. One of them was a filthy little pervert, spying on his parents, doing the nasty. But because of Noah, 8 people survived. 3 different bloodlines were formed from that. So it's very important. We can. We don't know the grand scheme of our lives or our children, but we know that if we are obedient, Yahusha is trustworthy and faithful to our children as well. And not just, I'm not putting this in stone, but Yahusha will favour those who are his friends. He will see it through with our children as well. I don't know what that means in total. I don't know. They've got to go through their fiery trials just like we've had to go through in our lives. But look at this. This is hundreds and hundreds of years later. He's still honouring Abraham. Because if it was any of us, we would have been like, oh, this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Abraham's long dead. Stuff Lot. Lot couldn't have cared less. He was shagging his own daughters, and definitely stuff Ishmael. Who cares about Ishmael? Like he wasn't even in the belief, stuff him, But Yahusha doesn't feel like that. Even hundreds and hundreds of years later, he's honouring these promises. Abraham loved his nephew. Abraham loved his firstborn son, which was Ishmael. And of course, he loved Isaac as well. But so Yahusha honors the promise of land, because that was the biggest thing back in this era, land. So to us today, it would be more of a deliverance thing. So just remember that. Yahusha knows where everybody's at. He knows who's supposed to be where, what, how, and why. And he's got everybody on a path. So don't worry about your children. Tell them what you need to tell them. If they're adults, just follow the guidance of Yahusha. He knows everything. He knows the desires of your heart for your family. And leave it at that. Don't be upset by things, you know. And here's a little chart just to show you that. I mean, we've been up, if you look at the screen, down here was further down actually than this was Mount Sinai. They've come up here. They've been wandering all around here for 40 odd years. They came up here. Edom, they were told to be careful going through Edom, or don't stay away from Edom. This was Esau's family in Edom. And Moab was Lot's family here. So I'm not going to go into this a great deal. Just wanted to generally inform you that that's what was going on at this time. So that's the descendants of Lot and Esau. So find some rest in that, guys. Find some peace. The world, it will take, if it hasn't already, will tamper, will beat and bruise all of our children, just like it's beaten us, you know. And I believe even if they've been immersed, you know, that will happen. Much better to be immersed though and have that power within you. But what have you been through? I know what I've been through. Yahusha will finish the work he started. So let's go on. You see, before Yahuwah gave the Moabites their land, a large and powerful tribe lived there, called the Emim. And they were as tall as the Anakim. It's just another version of Nephilim. The Moabites called them Emim. And though others sometimes use the name Rephaim for both the Anakim and the Emim. When we came to the Zered Gorge along the southern border of Moab, Yahuwah told us to cross the gorge into Moab, and we did. This was 38 years after we left Kadesh Barnea, and by that time all the men who had been in the army at Kadesh Barnea had died, just as Yahuwah had said they would. Yahuwah kept getting rid of them all until finally none of them were left. Now, I was thinking about this a little while ago, and now I've forgotten the math. You can work it out yourself, but I was thinking men in this era used to live, over 100 years, and they were only wandering for 40 years. So if you were 20 years old, and anybody that was 20 years or older was considered a cannibal and died in the wilderness. So by that theory, he must have wiped them out. Obviously, the ground opened up and swallowed some of them, and there were plagues and snakes and you name it. But even just those who survived must have died early. Otherwise, if you were, say, 21 years old and wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, you wouldn't have died of natural age, because you would have only been 21 plus 40, 60 in your 60s, which is not old in this era. So, but Yahusha says they all died. That generation died in the wilderness. I just thought that was interesting. We just assumed they died of old age. No, they wouldn't have, because they only wandered for 40 odd years. So Yahusha supernaturally, over the course of 40 years, wiped out that first generation. And only the people that were 20 years or younger made it. So anyone 20 years or younger, if you were born in that and you were only 1 year old, you would have been in your 40s. If you were just made it, you were 19, you would have been in your 40s. No, 60s. 60s, you would have been in the 60s. So the oldest people on the earth would have only been the oldest people in Israel would have only been in their 60s, you know. So you can do the math yourself, but I just thought that was interesting. So, and they all died just as Yahuwah said they would. Yahuwah kept getting rid of them all until finally none of them were left. Then Yahuwah told me, Moses, go back to the town of Ar. Go back to Ar now and cross Moab's north border in Ammon. But don't start a war with the Ammonites, because I gave them their land and I won't give it to Israel. dealt with that. The Rephaim, this was interesting. Remember we were talking about the Anakim and the Rephaim? What's that about? The Rephaim are the post-flood version of the Nephilim. Post being after. So the Rephaim are the post-flood version of the Nephilim, which means fallen. A race of genetically modified giants. Just means fallen. Really, they weren't always giants. They were deformed and they were hybrid. They were, tampered with DNA. Most of the time they were deformed giant beasts, behemoth. That were the result of fallen messengers, demons, breeding with human women before the Great Flood. A few centuries after the Tower, and obviously it's happening again after the flood. A few centuries after the Tower of Babel incident with Nimrod, which took place about 300 years after the Great Flood, the world was populated enough that if a group of people migrated into a new land, they either had to take that land from its previous owners, or they settled there and grew into numbers that eventually dominated that area. So we see that a lot. There's this nation living there, but prior to that, someone else lived there that were taken over by them, and prior to them, someone took over that, they took over, constantly conquering the land. So that's just, if you ever see the word Rephaim, or what was the other word? Rephaim or Anakim, that's giant-like people. So obviously the tampering with the DNA, the demonic thing with the demons is still happening, just like it is today. Scientists everywhere trying to breed, clone humans, create empty shells that demons can possess. So, and before the Ammonites conquered the land that Yahuwah gave them, some of the Rephaim used to live there, although the Ammonites called them 𝗪𝗠𝗪. The 𝗪𝗠𝗪 were a large and powerful tribe and were as tall as the Anakim. But Yahuwah helped the Ammonites, and they killed many of the 𝗪𝗠𝗪 and forced the rest to leave. Then the Ammonites settled there, and Yahuwah helped them as he had helped the Edomites, who killed many of the Horites in Seir and forced the rest to leave before settling there themselves. That word 𝗪𝗠𝗪 is interesting. 𝗪𝗠𝗪 means the people whose speech sounds like buzzing of bees. That's pretty spooky on the surface, but it just means that their manner of speech to the Hebrew ear was odd and must have been rather high-pitched vocalization. That's 𝗪𝗠𝗪. So, all this blue writing is Moses. Moses is telling us all this for a reason. It's a bit of a history lesson. 40 odd years after the fact, it's a history lesson just to inform the younger generation. This is what happened. This is how your parents responded to it. Please don't do the same thing. I won't be here much longer. Carry this torch. Keep going. And then we just have some artist impressions of the Rephaim, Anakim, Nephilim. Click on that. Will my links work? There you go. There's that one. Just some artist impressions. There's some links at the end of this article if you want to look up, if you're new to all this and don't know much about the Nephilim. I don't need to click on these, you can see them. So that's Goliath of Gad. He was a Nepho. So let's go on. King Sihon bites the dust. Remember King Sihon? And after we went through Ammon, Yahuwah said, Yisrael, pack up your stuff, take down your tents, cross the Arnon River Gorge. The territory of the Amorite king Sihon of Heshbon lies on the other side of the river, but I'm giving you his land. So attack and take it. Today I will start making all other nations afraid of you. They will tremble with fear when anyone mentions you, and they will be terrified when you show up. So after we had crossed the Arnon and had set up camp in the Kedemoth desert, I sent messengers to King Sihon of Heshbon, telling him that his nation and ours could be at peace. I asked him to please let Yisrael go across his country, and that we would walk straight through without turning off the road. He could even sell us food and water, and we would pay with silver. We needed to reach the Jordan River and cross it. So they're not interested in this land. They want to go over to the Promised Land. So he's saying, let's be at peace. We just need to walk across your land, which is still a big deal for 3 million people. But we don't want to take you over. Don't be freaked out or afraid. We're not coming to attack you. We're just walking through. We need to reach the Jordan River and cross it because Yahuwah our Elohim was giving us the land on the west side. The Edomites and Moabites had already let us cross their land, so I asked King Sihon to please let us cross his land as well. But he refused. He refused because Yahuwah had hardened his heart. Interesting. Yahuwah had hardened his heart and he stubbornly sought to fight us. When did we last recall Yahuwah hardening someone's heart to bring forth his purposes? The Pharaoh. So Yahuwah told me, I'm going to help you defeat Sihon and take his land. So attack him. And we met King Sihon and his army in battle at Jahaz, and Yahuwah our Elohim defeated us, helped us. Yahuwah our Elohim helped us defeat them. We killed the king, his sons, and everyone else in the army. Then I captured and destroyed every town in Sihon's kingdom, killing everyone, but kept all the livestock and everything else of value. And Yahuwah helped us capture every town from the Arnon River Gorge north to the boundary of Gilead, including the town of Aruah on the edge of the gorge and the town in the middle of the gorge. However, we stayed away from the Ammonite towns, both in the hill country and near the Jabbok River, just as Yahuwah had instructed. The beginning of this war is interesting, as it greatly mirrors what happened with the Pharaoh in Egypt. King Sihon was offered peace, and all he had to do was let Israel march through his land on the way to Canaan. Heshbon was on the east side of the Jordan River, and as such was not part of the land set aside for Israel. Therefore, there was no need to conquer these people. However, King Sihon refused the offer of peace and attacked Israel, and the result was the annihilation of the Amorites. Yahusha hardened the heart of King Sihon, just as he'd done with the Pharaoh, bringing about his plans and wonders again. We went through all that in Exodus when we were wondering what's wrong with this Pharaoh. And it's not Yahusha's fault, remember. He did harden his heart, but there was already wickedness and evil going on there anyway. And that's just part of Yahusha's sovereignty. We do have free will, but our free will is only to a point. Yahusha has elected chosen those who he's going to deliver, those he hasn't. How does he choose? Is it fair? Is it unfair? It's got nothing to do with us. He determines who he's going to deal with and how he's going to deal with them. So he hardened his heart, and as such, there was a great battle, and of course, Israel won and took over all that land. So because of that, a few of the tribes, we're going to come into that now, I won't talk about that, going into it, some of the tribes want to live there. King Og was done and dusted. So King Sihon bites the dust. Now we come to King Og. King Og, the great OG. King Og is done and dusted. Next we turned and headed for the land of Bashan, where King Og and his entire army attacked us at Edrei. But Yahuwah told me, don't be afraid of him, for I've already given you victory over Og and his entire army, and I'll give you all his lands too. So treat him just as you treated King Sihon of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon. So Yahuwah our Elohim handed King Og and all his people over to us, and we killed them all and conquered all 60 of his towns too. 60 towns, which were, maybe that's just a generalisation. Maybe it was 61, maybe it was 58. Anyway, still, it's a lot of towns, which were all fortified with high walls and barred gates. So this wasn't some primitive Bedouin and gypsy-like. No, these were fortified brick-ass walls, mate. Iron gates, a well-established civilization, highly, government, rules and laws, and this is established civilization. 60 odd towns, high walls, fortified with high walls and bar gates. We completely laid waste to the kingdom of Bashan, just as we had to King Sihon. Men, women, children alike were all destroyed, but we kept all the livestock for ourselves and took plunder from all the towns. And we took the land of the two Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, all the way from the Arnon Gorge to Mount Hermon. And we now conquered all the cities on the tablelands and all Gilead and Bashan, as far as the towns of Salekah and Edrei, which were part of Og's kingdom in Bashan. So the reason I'm telling you that is because Yisrael's now taken over all these towns, and so I don't want you to think this is just some primitive people throwing spears, like, cowboys and Indians. No, these were great armies, great nations. This is not primitive civilization here. This is well established, So it shows us that Yahusha is much more powerful than any of this, And these were gypsies who conquered them. Bedouins, Yisrael were a whole bunch of Bedouins. But because of their numbers, because of their belief, and because of their supernatural king, Yahusha, they were able to win, have victory. So what does that say to us in our life? That's the moral of the story whenever we read about David and Goliath, isn't it? Doesn't matter what you're up against, who is more powerful. Well, do you believe that? Doesn't matter what we face in our life, Yahusha is more powerful. He holds us in his hand. We are his treasured bride. In the brackets here, by the way, King Og of Bashan was the last survivor of the giant Rephaites, and his bed was made of iron. It was more than 4 meters long. That's just standard bedroom, a standard room in a house, 4 meters long and 2 meters wide, and it can still be seen in the Ammonite city of Rabbah. That's Moses saying this. It still can be seen. So it was still, you could still see it when Moses was writing this. King Og was actually the last of the remnant of the Rephaim Nephilim, at least in his region. Of course, a decent bed is always a bit bigger than the man who uses it, but it still indicates how tall this King Og was. And completely independent Egyptian records from that same era, also make mention of this king's enormous bed and the astounding finding of several skeletal remains of men in the region of Bashan who were about 3 meters tall. That's, your standard size of a ceiling. That was a small one, small man, small Nephilim. Some of them were 4 stories high, 12, 16 meters high. Some were higher. This is basically a repeat of Numbers 21 account of the victory over Og and what happened afterwards. Because remember, Moses is speaking to the new generation of Hebrews, because the first generation of the Exodus was now dead and gone, and the majority of the generation Moses is addressing in Deuteronomy is getting a history lesson, because they had either been born after most of the great events he was speaking about, or they were too young, or they were young children when these things occurred, and they really didn't comprehend the significance of all that had happened. And remember, even though Moses had been writing stuff down, it wasn't like today where you can just take a book off a shelf and have a history lesson. Most of it was oral. So he was relying on the parents and leaders of the tribes to hand down this teaching, and many a time they didn't. So that's why Moses at the end of his life is refreshing their memories from his mouth. Because you know what Chinese whispers are like. Over the course of months and years and decades, things get twisted and changed and mixed in with the culture. And so Moses is getting up there and saying, this is how, remember, this is what it's done. This is how it's laying it straight. This is what Yahusha wants us to do. I'm not going to be here for long. And at that time I gave this command to the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half of the tribe of Manasseh that wanted to live east of the Jordan. Remember, those 3 tribes wanted to live on the other side of the Jordan, didn't want to go into the promised land. They loved the land that they just conquered and wanted to stay on this side. So Moses said, although Yahuwah your Elohim has given you this land as your property, all your fighting men must cross the Jordan ahead of your Yisraelite relatives, armed and ready to assist them. Your wives, children, and numerous livestock, however, may stay behind in the towns I've given you. And when Yahuwah has given security to the rest of the Israelites, and they're all settled, as he's done with you, and when they occupy the land Yahuwah your Elohim is giving them across the Jordan River, then you may all return here to the land I have given you. And they actually do honour that. think that's in Joshua. They do honor it, and they do help them conquer it, and they do get to go home to their families. And I gave Joshua this charge: you have seen for yourself everything Yahweh your Elohim has done to these two kings. He will do the same to all the kingdoms on the west side of the Jordan too. So don't be afraid of the nations there, for Yahweh your Elohim will fight for you. Remember, on the west side, the Canaanites, the Philistines, were considered the most ferocious and savage people on the earth. So they had a lot to fear if they wanted to tap into it. Moses is saying, don't be afraid, and look what we've faced. We don't often, it's good to look into the history and dig into this, because the King Og was a bloody Nephilim, like a Rephaim. So, and they conquered him. So Yahusha's instilling belief. He's strengthening this next generation. He's putting them up against giants, great walled cities, so that when they do cross the Jordan River with Joshua, they won't be afraid. Look, you've just conquered all these armies. Don't be afraid of the nations there, for Yahweh your Elohim will fight for you. We don't have anything to fear, guys. You don't have to fear any of the plagues on the earth, COVID-19. You don't have to fear the government. You don't have to fear any of that, because no matter what bleakness we see on the news, in Facebook land, everything, who is walking ahead of us and behind us? 1,000 may fall on one side and 10,000 on the other. Look to him as your reality. And I pleaded with Yahuwah and said, "O my master Yahuwah, you have only begun to show your greatness and the strength of your hand to me, your servant. Is there any Elohim on the earth or in the sky who can perform such great and mighty deeds as you do? Please let me cross the Jordan to see the wonderful land on the other side, the beautiful hill country in the Lebanon mountains." But Yahuwah was angry with me because of you. He's blaming Yisrael, but Yahusha isn't having it. And he wouldn't listen to me. "That's enough, son," he declared. "Shut up about this and don't mention it again. Go up to the Pisgah Peak and look over the land in every direction. Take a good look, because you're not crossing the Jordan River. Instead, go and talk to Joshua and encourage him, strengthen him, for he will lead the people across the Jordan, give them all the land you now see before you as their possession." So we stayed in the valley near Beth Peor. Yahusha couldn't give special favor, special, thing to Moses. He, like the rest of the first generation, were disobedient, And even though he was the chosen mediator, of which there was never one again, except in Yahusha, because Joshua didn't become the mediator, he just became the military leader, the general. And, there were no other mediators. There was no special relationship like that again until Yahusha came along. So even the great Moses was not given, I believe he'll be in the New Jerusalem. He had a very special relationship, Abraham and Moses, but he would still had to reap the consequences of his disobedience, just like we had to in our lives. And if we keep being disobedient and sticking it to Yahusha and having dreadful behavior, when we know it's one thing to do something in ignorance, but when he teaches us and tells us that's not on, we have to change. Do you want to be like the first generation or the second generation who get to go into the promised land, experience the promises in your life? Not just the promises of eternal life. I'm talking about promises next week, next month, next year. Yahusha's laid out a plan for you. Are you tapping into it? What kind of report are you going to listen to? Negative one, like the 10 witnesses, or the positive report, like the 2 witnesses, like Joshua and Caleb came back and said, "This land is amazing, let's go for it." What voice are you listening to? Yahusha's? Or that stinking dirty demon, Ⅎ𝗏? So that's the first 3 chapters we've gone through today, guys. It's been enough. There's a few links there to some older videos I did a few years ago. There's a few videos there. If you don't know anything about this, the transhumanism and the Nephilim and the immortality. There's a few old videos I did with Lou years and years ago. The information is really good. If you want to click on those, you can watch those videos as well. Some of them are a bit long, but the information is great. So stay strong, guys. Don't listen to any of that negativity. Go forth in your promises. Every day you're working towards something, you know, whether it's for your kids, whether it's for a house, whether it's in your career, whether it's for your retirement, whatever it is, whatever Yahusha said to you, you can have this. You might have to work a bit hard to get it, but, you know, this is something I'm going to let you have, you know. In your tarrying on before I come back, have it, take it. It's yours. Work for it. Behave yourself. Love your clients, love your family. Behave the right way and you will see this happen, you know. Love you guys. Stay strong.